Betty and Tag's Big Sports Day. A 15-minute Hey Dougie. Storytelling narrator, it was a bright and sunny morning at the Squirrel Club. The grass was green, the sky was blue, and today was a very special day. Sports Day. All the squirrels were excited. There were flags waving in the breeze. There were colorful cones lined up on the grass. There were hoops, beanbags, balls, and a big finish line. And right in the middle of the field stood Dougie. Dougie was wearing a big whistle around his neck. He looked very serious. But his tail was wagging, because Dougie loved Sports Day. Betty bounced onto the field. She looked at all the sports equipment. There were so many things to try: running, jumping, throwing, balancing. Betty was ready for everything. Tag arrived a little more slowly. He looked at the running track. Then he looked at the finish line. Then he looked at the very long race. Tag took a deep breath. He was not sure about running. Betty smiled at him. She gave him an encouraging little wave. Tag smiled back. Dougie blew his whistle. Toot! Sports Day had begun. The first race. The first event was the running race. All the squirrels lined up at the starting line. Betty stood proudly at the front. Tag stood beside her. Dougie raised his flag. Everyone got ready. 3, 2, 1. Go! Everyone ran. Betty raced forward. Tag ran too. But after a few steps, Tag noticed something. A tiny butterfly was flying beside him. Tag stopped. He watched the butterfly flutter from flower to flower. He forgot all about the race. Meanwhile, Betty was getting closer and closer to the finish line. She crossed it. Hooray! But Betty didn't celebrate for long. She looked behind her. Where was Tag? She ran back. There he was, watching the butterfly. Betty gently pointed toward the finish line. Tag suddenly remembered the race. He ran as fast as his little legs could go. He crossed the finish line. Everyone cheered. Dougie gave Tag a big thumbs up. Tag had not been the fastest, but he had finished the race, and that was what mattered. The beanbag throw. Next came the beanbag throwing competition. There was a big bucket waiting at the other end of the field. The squirrels each got a beanbag. Betty held hers carefully. She aimed, she threw, plop, into the bucket. Everyone cheered. Then it was Tag's turn. Tag looked at the bucket. He looked at the beanbag. He took a deep breath. He threw it, but the beanbag went whoosh! It flew over the bucket. Everyone looked up. The beanbag landed on top of a bush. Tag looked surprised. Betty giggled. Dougie laughed too. Tag tried again. He aimed carefully. He threw, plop, right into the bucket. Everyone cheered. Tag jumped up and down. He had done it. The obstacle course. Then Dougie showed everyone the next challenge. It was a huge obstacle course. There were hoops to jump through, a tunnel to crawl through, cones to run around, a balance beam to cross, and finally, a big muddy puddle. Betty's eyes became very wide. Tag's eyes became even wider. The race began. Betty jumped through the hoops. Boing, boing, boing. Then she dashed around the cones. Left, right. She crawled through the tunnel. Tag followed behind. But Tag got stuck halfway through. Only his little legs were sticking out. Betty gently pulled him. Pop! Out he came. Tag shook himself. Then they reached the balance beam. Betty walked across carefully. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. She made it. Tag stepped onto the beam. He wobbled. He wobbled again. He stretched out his arms. He took another step, and another, then plop. Tag fell into the soft grass. He wasn't hurt. He simply stood up and tried again. This time, step, step, step. He made it across. Betty cheered. Dougie cheered. Everyone cheered. Then came the muddy puddle. Betty jumped. Splash! Mud went everywhere. Tag looked at Betty. Betty looked at Tag. They both smiled. Then Tag jumped. Splash! Even more mud went everywhere. Everyone laughed. The final event. At last, it was time for the final event, the squirrel team relay. Betty and Tag were on the same team. They had to work together. Betty would run first, then Tag would take the baton. Dougie stood at the finish line. The squirrels lined up. Betty held the baton tightly. Dougie raised the flag. Toot! Betty ran. She ran around the cones. She jumped over the little hurdle. She ran faster and faster. Then she reached Tag. She carefully passed him the baton. Tag held it, and off he went. Tag ran as fast as he could. But suddenly, the baton slipped. Plop! It fell onto the grass. Tag stopped. He looked at the baton. He looked at the finish line. Then he looked at Betty. Betty smiled. She didn't look angry. She simply shouted encouragement. Tag picked up the baton. He kept running. The other teams were already near the finish line. Tag ran faster, faster, and faster. Betty ran beside him. She encouraged him all the way. Together, they reached the finish line. Hooray! They had finished. They didn't come first. They didn't come second. But they had worked together, and that made them very proud. The Sports Day surprise. Dougie gathered everyone together. He had something special, a big box. Everyone wondered what was inside. Dougie opened the box. Inside were medals. Every squirrel received a medal. Betty looked at hers proudly. Tag looked at his. Then Tag noticed something. There was one more medal in the box. It was a very special medal. Dougie handed it to Betty and Tag together. It said, "Best Teamwork." Betty and Tag smiled. They had learned something important. Sports Day wasn't just about being the fastest. It wasn't about throwing the farthest. It wasn't about winning every race. Sports Day was about trying your best, helping your friends, getting back up when you fall, and most importantly, having fun. Betty and Tag looked at each other. Then they looked at the muddy puddle. They both had the same idea. They ran toward it. Splash! Mud flew everywhere. Dougie looked at them. He shook his head. Then he laughed. Everyone laughed. And that was the end of the best sports day ever. Dougie raised his paws. Everyone cheered. Hooray for Sports Day. And Betty and Tag, they were already wondering, what sport could they try next? Maybe swimming, maybe cycling, maybe jumping, or perhaps more muddy puddles. Everyone laughed. The end. Betty and Tag's wonderful picnic day. A 10-minute Hey Dougie. Storytelling narrator. It was a beautiful sunny morning at the Squirrel Club. The sky was bright blue. The clouds were soft and fluffy. The birds were singing, and the grass was sparkling in the morning sunshine. Today was going to be a very special day. It was picnic day. Betty was very excited. She had packed a big picnic basket. Inside were sandwiches, fruit, little cakes, and some delicious snacks. Betty checked everything carefully. Sandwiches? Yes. Apples? Yes. Bananas? Yes. Juice? Yes. And a big blanket? Yes. Betty was ready. Then Tag arrived. Tag was carrying a tiny backpack. He looked very happy. He had brought his favorite toy and a small ball. Betty smiled. They were ready for a wonderful picnic together. Finding the perfect spot. Betty and Tag walked across the field. They looked for the perfect place to have their picnic. Near the tree? Too much shade. Near the flowers? Too many bees. Near the little hill? Too windy. They kept walking. Then they found a lovely spot underneath a big tree. The grass was soft, the shade was cool, and there were beautiful flowers all around. It was perfect. Betty spread out the picnic blanket. Tag helped by pulling one corner. But suddenly, whoosh! A little gust of wind blew the blanket into the air. The blanket flew over Tag's head. Tag couldn't see. He walked forward, then left, then right, until plop. He sat down on the grass. Betty laughed. Tag popped his head out from underneath the blanket. He laughed too. Together they put the blanket back down. This time, they placed some heavy picnic baskets on the corners. Now the blanket couldn't fly away. Time for food. Betty opened the picnic basket. The delicious smell of sandwiches filled the air. Tag's tummy rumbled. Grrr! Betty looked at him. Tag looked at his tummy. They both laughed. They sat down and began eating. First came the sandwiches. Yummy! Then came the fruit. Crunchy apples, sweet bananas, juicy strawberries. Tag loved the strawberries. He picked one up, but just as he was about to eat it, a tiny bird landed nearby. The bird looked at Tag. Then it looked at the strawberry. Tag looked at the bird. The bird looked at the strawberry. Tag looked at Betty. Betty smiled. Tag carefully placed a tiny piece of fruit on the grass. The bird hopped closer. Tweet, tweet, it ate the fruit. Tag smiled. Soon more little birds arrived. 1, 2, 3. There were birds everywhere. Betty and Tag watched quietly. The birds happily enjoyed their little snack.